Riding a wave of momentum going into their bye week, the Seahawks getting a big primetime win over the Giants in the Meadowlands behind a dominant defensive effort. How do those defensive improvements play out as a contender in the NFC? Rob Rang and I are going to be breaking it all down on our latest edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s out there, whether you're listening in nearby Spokane or across the country in Boston, Massachusetts. We greatly appreciate you making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. The Seahawks improving to 3-1 last night with a dominant defensive effort on the road in primetime, led by none other than Devin Witherspoon, who had one of the most dynamic games that I've seen from a secondary player in a long time. Seattle winning 24-3 and staying within a game of the 49ers in the NFC West heading into their bye week. We're going to be dishing out some Tuesday musings here after a Monday night football game, answering mailbag questions and much more in a jam-packed Tuesday episode brought your way by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Now for your lead story here on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Moving to 3-1 and winning their third consecutive game, the Seahawks didn't have the offense clicking on all cylinders, but it didn't matter last night. They could have had Rob or I playing the quarterback position with the way that the defense was playing last night. They scored points off a Devin Witherspoon interception, a franchise record 11 sacks, held the Giants running backs to barely over 2 yards per carry. It was a near perfect performance on that side of the football. And Rob, from a big picture scheme of things, this was a game that the Seahawks, by the time we got to game day, they finally were 2.5-point favorites. But I don't care that the Giants have been struggling mightily on offense. This is still prime time on the road, playing in a really tough environment. For the Seahawks to go out and play the way they did with all the injuries they had to deal with on both sides of the football, particularly on defense, this feels like the type of victory that might just put the Seahawks helmet in the ring as far as truly being an early season contender in the NFC.
No, it certainly feels like it could do exactly that, Corbin. I think definitely from a national perspective, you go on the road on Monday Night Football and you thump a team the way the Seahawks, completely dismantled the New York Giants. Then I think that you're going to get a lot more national attention. You have the rookie performance that you got out of Devin Witherspoon, of course. And I think that's what you said there about the Giants, the fact that they had their own injury problems. Obviously, they are not as dynamic without a player like a Saquon Barkley. And the left tackle, Andrew Thomas, I think that had a lot to do with the Seahawks creating the pass rush, the consistent pass rush that they did. But to me, one of the most exciting things about it is the fact that they did tie that franchise record with 11 sacks in this game. The only other time that they had matched that was way back in 1986 when they beat the LA Raiders at that, the then LA Raiders. So, I mean, we're going back, historic performance by the Seahawks. And this was a desperate Giants team. This was a Giants team that went to the playoffs a year ago. So, I'm stunned that the Seahawks were able to dominate the Giants as much as they did. I think that really it is a testament to the young talent that the Seahawks have and just the way that Pete Carroll and his staff get their players hyped up. I mean, we're going to talk here in a few moments about the fact that, there were some knocks that the Seahawks took in this game. The injury to Jamal Adams certainly was a bit of a downer at this point, but to see guys like Bobby Wagner and Jordan Brooks and Devin Witherspoon and Uchenna Nwosu each get multiple sacks in this game. It wasn't just one player. And that to me is got to be pretty fearsome for the rest of the NFC when they see a team that they know can absolutely put up points. And now they can play a little bit of defense as well. Watch out, NFL. The Seahawks are for real.
Yeah, and I think, you come out of this game and there's going to be plenty of fans that are going to be saying, well, the offense wasn't clicking. They only scored 2 touchdowns on the offensive side of the ball, and one of those came after one of the defensive turnovers created by none other than Super Mario Edwards himself in the late part of the first quarter. But you also had Geno Smith banged up, and you got lucky he avoided a severe injury with that hit that he took along the sidelines. You were down to the point where you didn't have a single starter, at least playing where they were supposed to start at on your offensive line. The receivers, there were a few guys that are still a little bit banged up. So you look at the offense in general, the fact they were able to weather that storm, they still scored some points, but the defense was so dominant. Again, once they went up 7-0, that ended up being game over with the way that the Seahawks defense played. And the only points they gave up came after the Seahawks couldn't do anything with great field position in the first half. So the defense played lights out, and you just look at where things stand for this entire group. The 11 sack effort, that was the second time that's happened, as you mentioned, 1986, when I was -3 years old. The Seahawks pulled that off. So it had been a long time since they last did that, but they had never had 4 players with with multiple sacks in the same game. It had never happened before until last night's win. So you're seeing guys at the secondary level, at the linebacker level, 2 of them, Wagner and Brooks, getting double sacks there. And so this really, I want to give Clint Hurtt a shout out. It's not just because that's how Pete Carroll answered my question about the pass rush. I thought that this was the best executed game plan that he has had as a defensive coordinator in a game since he took that position. It was clearly evident from the outset. And we talked about this some on our Friday episode last week with Nick Lee. This was one of the pointers I had. I said, hey, take a page out of Wink Martindale's book. I think that this Giants line, as bad as they are, try to force Daniel Jones to beat you under heavy duress. And that is exactly what they did. Clint Hurtt said, all right, I've got the guys here. I've got Jamal Adams back. I know he got hurt early, but I've got Devin Witherspoon playing in the slot. I've got Wagner. I've got Brooks. I've got all these guys that can blitz effectively. I'm going to mix and match. I'm going to send an extra rusher regularly. And it really disrupted Daniel Jones. He was panicked back there. And understandably, he was under duress the entire game. So I think we got to give a ton of credit to Clint Hurtt. And it's clear that this defense is buying into what he's selling from a run scheme standpoint this year so much better than what they did last year. The guys just seem like gap fit wise. At this point, 4 games is enough for me to start to say, this doesn't look like it's a mirage at this point. I don't care that Saquon Barkley didn't play in this game. I love what I'm seeing from a gap integrity standpoint and just playing together as a unit. We didn't see that last year against the run, Rob. And maybe it's just Bobby Wagner being back, the interior linemen like Jaron Reed that they've added, but whatever it is, they're just playing as a unit, as a unified front seven. They're secondary as well, and they are making plays. They're not letting guys get outside of contain. They're not giving up semi-size holes like they did at times last year. That's why they have the 3rd best run defense in the entire NFL right now coming out of this game. So there's a lot to be excited about. They're turning turnovers into points. Obviously, they've still given up a lot of passing yards, but last night we saw them turn the corner in that regard as well because that pass rush was so intense. There's a lot to be excited. That's why the Seahawks right now, Rob, are in 2nd place in the NFC West squarely at 3-1, and they are right on the cusp of being up there with the Eagles, the 49ers, the Cowboys, the NFC's elite. If they can play defense like they did last night, look out, rest of the conference.
Yeah, exactly. Now that remains to be seen if they're going to be able to play that well down the stretch against teams that weren't, or struggling as much as the New York Giants. But still, I think that is very much the conversation now. Is that everybody knows that the top 3, or at least the perceived top 3 in the NFC. You just mentioned them: San Francisco, Philadelphia, and Dallas, and whatever order that you want to list them. And I still think that you have to mention the 49ers as the top, of course, of the NFC West. But right behind them with the Seahawks. The Rams are now 2-2 at this point.
Yep, messed up graphic.
After beating the Colts in overtime. And that was a fascinating game as well. There's a lot of people out there, and the Seahawks will testify to this. Of course, the Rams came into Lumen Field and stunned Seattle in week 1. That was one of those 2 victories. But, the Rams are interesting in that they are more of a veteran team, whereas Seattle is pretty young in so many ways. And the Rams just jumped out to a huge 20-0 halftime lead against the Colts, and then let the Colts actually get back into the game. Now, give the Rams credit. They won that game in overtime, but still, that was a fascinating game in a lot of different ways there. And of course, the Rams have been playing without one of their absolute superstars in Cooper Kupp. The Arizona Cardinals are sitting there at 1-3, but give the Cardinals a little bit of credit. Of course, everybody assumed that they were going to completely fall apart without Kyler Murray, at the quarterback position. And instead, Joshua Dobbs has actually played decent football. Now, again, they played San Francisco this past weekend. They were expected to lose, and they did lose. They basically got doubled up by the 49ers. But still, the Cardinals are an interesting club. They've got some young talent on their team as well. They got a rookie wide receiver, Michael Wilson, who actually is tied for the league lead among rookies in terms of touchdown receptions, with a couple they had, both of them against the 49ers in this past performance. So again, I think that this is an NFC West division, Corbin, that everybody knows right now. It's the 49ers, and the Seahawks are right there with them as well. I think the NFC West is actually a stronger division than most people in the National Football League realize. And so if the Seahawks can finish either first, obviously, or second, I think they're very much going to be in that playoff conversation.
Yeah, this is a division that is going to be a pretty good test for them, especially with the Rams resurging a little bit and the Cardinals being better than advertised. They've been in every game that they've played to this point. They could have won most of the games. Even the one against the 49ers, they were able to get within a score in the first half. They just couldn't slow down Christian McCaffrey. So it is still a very tough division, the NFC West, and the Seahawks are sitting pretty right now after winning some key division games here, beating the Panthers, which they didn't do last year, beating the Giants on the road, and also beating the Lions on the road. You've got wins on all 3 of those teams now on your resume, which certainly helps for your playoff standing early in the season. Up next, we're going to tackle your questions on our Tuesday mailbag segment. Don't go away. You're listening to the Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks, which is brought your way by our friends over at Game Time. If you've ever been on the hunt for sports or concert tickets at the last minute, the process can be anxiety-provoking. Buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be so stressful that you want to pull your hair out. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets with all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer deals and last-minute tickets, with their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun you're going to have. If you're wanting to see the Seahawks after the bye week against the Bengals on Sunday afternoon in Cincinnati, using Game Time's awesome flash deals feature and a detailed stadium map, you can get great seats right now for under $50. It's super easy. Forget planning months in advance. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the day of the event, and Game Time guarantees means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDINNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDINNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. You're listening to the Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s out there for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. With us not having a game to prepare for this week, there won't be a normal matchup Wednesday tomorrow, but we are going to have our quarter of the season awards, and we'll be breaking all that down on our Wednesday episode. So you won't want to miss it. And there's going to be a special guest that might be coming on to help us out with that as well. Let's get to our mailbag, shall we? Our first question here, Rob, coming from Mike Sent from New Jersey on Twitter. They were playing 3 safeties at the beginning of the game. If Adams doesn't get concussed, would Witherspoon have seen any snaps at the nickelback and produce such a memorable night and future at this position?
I think that he still would have had some significant snaps at the nickelback position. I don't know that the Seahawks would have been quite as aggressive. I think that you would have seen Jamal Adams coming off the edge more than Devin Witherspoon, perhaps even more than we saw with Seattle's linebackers. But I think that Devin Witherspoon just basically sees the game. And so whether number 33 would have been out there or not, I think that, again, Devin Witherspoon just was still going to be able to have his spectacular performance. To me, it was the sacks that certainly were kind of the icing on the cake, but it was the pick six, especially considering the moment in which he got that interception and just the big hits from the outset of the game that really set the tone for how the Seahawks performed as a whole on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, he was playing some nickel corner in this game, regardless of what happened with Jamal Adams. But that was mainly because of the injuries they had to Kobe Bryant and Artie Burns. That was their natural nickel corner, and they felt confident putting Mike Jackson out there. So I don't know if he would have played it as much. The Seahawks had to do an audible there, but they have the guys now to be able to do it, with Devin Witherspoon being such a Swiss Army knife in the secondary. Our next question from Ross Torero on YouTube: from a pass rush perspective, was this game more about the Seahawks turning it up or the Giants stinking it up? That's a really good question, and building off of what we've talked about, not just on last night's post-game episode, but what we were just talking about with the pass rush. Based on the all 22 that I'm watching, the Giants' offensive line is god-awful. So I think we have to account for that some. But as I mentioned, I just thought the way that Clint Hurt mixed and matched the blitz packages, there was a clear emphasis to what they were doing in this game, and I thought they executed it really well. So I know this is the boring answer, but I think you got to say it's a little bit of both. I really have been encouraged the last 3 games. I mean, Seattle's pass rush in the second half at Detroit was really good. That's when the light switch started to come on. And then you add a guy like Witherspoon that can blitz so well from the nickel, and you're starting to see the interior defensive line come together the way Mario Edwards is creating damage, roughing the quarterbacks up from the interior. Jaron Reed, Uchenna Nwosu is taking over games. Boye Mafe continues to show that he's the most improved player in this team. So I think that you can't take anything away from the Seahawks here. And at the same time, New York's missing Andrew Thomas. Their interior offensive line has had musical chairs going on all season long, guys getting benched and players getting injured. So yes, this is a bad offensive line. And yes, Daniel Jones is playing like he's been playing behind a bad offensive line. He's really skittish, but don't take this away from the Seahawks. They handled this game from the front all the way to the back with their pass rush. So I think it's a little bit of both. Our next question here from Seattle Dom: did either Bradford or Oluwatimi play well enough to threaten for a long-term starting role?
Well, in my opinion, yes, on both. I was very impressed by how the rookies performed when they got kind of pushed into the action. And that was one of the things that I was most impressed by is, again, they got pushed into the action. No one was expecting to see Damian Lewis go down, to see Evan Brown have to slide over to the guard position, which, of course, is going to bring in Oluwatimi, and at the center position, and to see Phil Haynes. We know that he has been, kind of dealing with an ankle injury here for a while now. So Bradford was expected to play some, but not expected to basically play virtually the entire game. And as I said in our couple of our episodes leading up to the game against the Giants, I had huge concerns about the New York Giants front, specifically with Dexter Lawrence and Leonard Williams. Not necessarily the biggest, or not necessarily the flashiest pass rushers on the outside, but just the beef that the Giants had on the inside. So to see Seattle be able to take on the physicality and match the Giants in that way, I thought was very impressive by both of them. There's still going to be some hit and miss with both players, and there definitely were some pass rushes that they allowed that I think that as veteran players, maybe that wouldn't have happened. But they also got some push. And one last thing I would mention about that, how comforting it was to see the Seahawks when they did get close, that they punched it in right up the middle with a touchdown by Kenneth Walker III. Just basically kind of just saying, hey, we know you're big and you're bad up front, but still, this is who we are as a club, and we're going to try and run the ball. And so that to me was very impressive and a sign that the Seahawks had confidence in their young offensive lineman as well.
I loved that play for a couple of reasons. Seeing Anthony Bradford manhandle Leonard Williams the way that he did, and it ended up being a post-play skirmish after that, but he didn't back down. He's like, I'm here to play. I'm here to get after it in the run game. And Oluwatimi gave up no pressures in this game, watching the All-22. So there were encouraging things. They both had some down plays in this game, but there's a lot to be excited about with those two still from a long-term perspective. Seahawk fan 2314 on Twitter. I was saying this to my buddy at the game. Bobby Wagner, is he the greatest Seahawk of all time? I know Walter Jones is great. I started watching in 06, so I didn't get to see his full dominance, but Bobby has been elite for such a long time and the glue to this defense. So, Rob, I think you and I would both agree with this. I'm not willing to quite put him on the Walter Jones pedestal at this point, just because Walter Jones to me was one of one. But I think that you can make at this point with how Bobby is playing right now at 33 years of age, still playing dominant football. And the fact that he came back after being gone for a year because he loved playing in Seattle so much. There's so many reasons why, if you're looking at the Mount Rushmore, he's clearly on there, but maybe he's ahead now of guys like Steve Largent and Cortez Kennedy because of all the all pros and just how dominant that he has been. So I don't know if I'm willing to quite go to the, Walter Jones end of the spectrum. I still think he is the Mr. Seahawk, but maybe if Bobby Wagner has a couple more really good seasons in him, this is a conversation that we can revisit. Real quick, Rob, last question for you coming from Ty Oswald. What is going on with JSN? I really thought he would have a bigger role. Am I missing something?
I don't think that you're missing anything. I think that that you're seeing Geno Smith's comfort level with DK Metcalf, who I think has played terrific football since the opening stinker against the LA Rams. And again, with Tyler Lockett, with Seattle focusing on the tight ends, I think that we're also seeing that the Seahawks are basically kind of trying to leave a little bit of an ace in the hole, I think, a little bit with Jackson Smith and Jigba. I think that they feel like he is going to be able to have a breakout performance here soon. I'll be honest with you. I was expecting to see more touchdowns than we've seen, specifically touchdowns. That to me is still in the area that I think that the Seahawks are vulnerable. They are not producing as many touchdowns when they get into the red zone, converting quite as many third downs as I thought would basically be his specialty. But at the same time, again, the Seahawks are 3-1, and I do think that they are just kind of waiting for the right opportunity to kind of truly unleash JSN.
And our last question for me here, see, that one actually I put on twice, so we will not answer that twice. Our last question will end up being Ty Oswald. So Bobby Wagner, I'll have plenty of chances to talk about. But anyway, when we come back, we are going to dish out our Tell the Truth Tuesday Musings. We're going to be blending our Monday and Tuesday shows together. Don't go away. You're listening to the Tuesday episode of Locked On Seahawks, which is brought your way by our friends over at FanDuel. Get ready for Week 5 in the NFL with incredible offers from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads for the upcoming week's games. The Seahawks, there's unfortunately, or I guess you could say fortunately, not going to be any spreads for this week other than maybe the players having a big spread with their family for a weekend dinner. Player props such as the improving Rookie of the Year odds for Devin Witherspoon, over, unders, and much more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season with an offer you won't want to miss. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. You're listening to the Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. It's your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s out there, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Tomorrow, we'll be kicking out our quarterly. Well, I guess I can't talk today for some reason. We'll be kicking out our quarterly awards going into Seattle's bye week. Which players have stood out on offense, defense, and special teams? Top rookie, most improved, you name it. We'll get to all that coming up tomorrow. You won't want to miss it. All right, let's get to our Tuesday musings, Rob. And this was an interesting game for the Seahawks, getting a 24-3 victory, primarily because of defensive dominance, not on offense. Woo, bless you. But looking at the Seahawks coming out of this game, what jumped out to you for the Seahawks offensively?
To me, one of the real positives here, we talked a lot about the defense in the first segment, and I think that Sure, you can just focus in on the defense. What to me, one of the most encouraging things though was how well that the Seahawks quarterbacks, specifically Geno Smith, as well as Drew Lock, performed. Now with Geno Smith, I mean, you just got to say this right off the bat: the Seahawks only mustered 13 total first downs in this game, so you can't, be feeling too good about Seattle's offense. But I'll say this: the touchdown to DK Metcalf was as beautiful of a throw as you're going to see in the NFL. The timing, the understanding of where he could throw that football, the defender basically had his back to him. Geno Smith looks at DK Metcalf, throws the ball on the outside where DK Metcalf is able to use his strength and his body control to be able to pluck the ball out of bounds and be able to keep his feet in bounds. To me, that was all pro level play on both the quarterback and the wide receiver. To see Geno Smith get knocked out of the game, just erupt in emotion, be able to come back from that injury, settle himself down emotionally, I think, again, is the kind of thing that is going to inspire a team. And then with Drew Lock, for him to be able to come in there, and obviously the player at which he made the big play is his former teammate in Denver, now obviously his teammate here with the Seahawks, and Noah Fant. But Drew Lock made some good throws. There were a couple of times where it was just a tick off of his receiver's hands, but still, you could see the accuracy, you could see the confidence. Pete Carroll walks over to him, and Drew Lock is laughing. That's exactly the type of attitude that you want to have from a backup quarterback. And just earlier in today's show, Corbin, we talked about kind of just looking at the landscape in the NFC West. I probably don't have to remind Seahawks fans out there, San Francisco 49ers were just an injury to their starting quarterback, Brock Purdy, away from perhaps going to the Super Bowl a year ago. I think the Seahawks are going to be the envy of basically every team in the NFL. That, look, Geno Smith is clearly Seattle's starter. But still, if something were to happen to Geno Smith, I think the Seahawks fans and certainly the Seahawks coaches, I think, feel very comfortable with Drew Lock perhaps getting plenty of snaps if that was the case.
And Pete Carroll has said it time and time again, that he feels like Drew Lock is ready to go. They've got him prepared, and he showed it last night. There were a few misses early. You could see some jitters of him coming in game, but he had that 51-yard pitch and catch to Noah Fant, and he was able to lead him down and get a touchdown for the half, which that was big. And going into the half up 14-3 instead of 7-3 or even 10-3. That was a big deal, and I think it was a gut punch to the Giants, especially considering how much they were struggling to move the ball against Seattle's defense. So I do think there was a lot to like about what we saw from both the quarterbacks. Speaking of Noah Fant, I don't know that there is a player heading towards free agency right now. Maybe Jordan Brooks, we can throw the hat in there too, because Jordan Brooks is playing really well on defense coming off that ACL injury. But Noah Fant, to me, is making as good of a run right now for a second contract with the Seahawks as any player that's heading towards free agency this next year. And you look at the raw numbers, he doesn't have the catch numbers because in this offense there's so many other mouths to feed, but he is creating so many big plays. He came into this game second among tight ends in yards per reception. Now he is number one after having that 51-yard catch, and just the balancing act. We got to see that 4.5 speed and the strength to be able to withstand guys trying to push him out of bounds and keep the balance along the sideline to tightrope the way he did and come up just short of having a 52-yard touchdown there. It set up Ken Walker's touchdown. Very next play, you're seeing the ability to create after the catch. We've seen him stretch the field a few times. Geno Smith clearly has a ton of confidence in him, and he'll go to him. Drew Lock clearly does from their Denver days. So I think that Noah Fant has been one of the more impressive players for the Seahawks on offense in these first 4 games. Even if the raw numbers don't necessarily stand out compared to some of the other tight ends in the league, he is making the most of his opportunities, and he has taken another step forward as a blocker as well. And just the mentality, you didn't see that early in his career at Denver. He has completely turned a new leaf the last 2 years in Seattle with blocking mindset. And so for those reasons, I feel like he has done as much as anybody that's going towards free agency to say, I deserve another contract here. And the Seahawks, they've got some instability at that position moving forward. You can sign him, bring him back. He has earned that second contract, at least to this point.
Well, I think that's a perfect segue to the stability and the blocking mindset that Seattle had in the interior of the offensive line. Again, I talked about this previously. I had huge concerns about Seattle's ability to hold up at the point of attack, and that was with their starters. When they lost Damian Lewis, of course, is the elder statesman of Seattle's front five, to lose him into this game, I thought, okay, now here's where you're going to see the Giants' fearsome foursome up front be able to kind of take over this football game. And instead, Evan Brown sliding over, Oluwatimi sliding up in at the center position, and then Anthony Bradford taking over at that right guard position. They were able to sustain Seattle's ability to pass block, as well as be able to create some push in the running game for Seattle to kind of, I was looking at halftime, and Seattle basically had like 50 rushing yards early on. This was exactly going to be the defensive kind of battle slugfest I thought it was. But for Seattle to continue to run the ball and have more and more success as the game went on, they wore down the Giants on their home stadium. You just very rarely see that happen. And so again, I think it's a testament to the young offensive line. You gave Clint Hurts some credit. I'm going to give Andy Dickerson and the rest of Seattle's offensive line coaches and Shane Waldron as well, an awful lot of credit for this performance, as well as obviously the players themselves. This was a formidable opponent they were facing, especially along the defensive line. And I thought the Seahawks came out of this game playing very, very well. And it's something that, again, I think there's going to be a lot of other NFL teams out there that are going to recognize the Seahawks are a lot more formidable than perhaps they looked on paper before. You're muted.
Oops, muted myself. And you mentioned it. The Seahawks only had 30 rushing yards in the first half of this game. Drew Lock had 11 of those on a scramble late in the half. Ken Walker III had 10 rushes for 19 yards, under 2 yards per carry in the first half. They could not get their running game on track. They ended the game averaging over 5 yards per carry and over 125 rushing yards in this game. And Ken Walker III had a 31-yard run towards the end of the game that skewed that a little bit, but they were able to really get some push in the second half with the run game. We saw Zach Charbonnet get after it as well, running the football well. He had a 15-yard carry, averaged more than 6 yards per carry when he touched the football, and all his carries came in the second half. They really were able to get that run game going, and I even thought they didn't run the ball enough in the second half with Geno Smith's injury situation, him not playing at 100%. There were a few times I thought they were a little too willing to air it out, and I would have liked to see a little more emphasis on the run game. And a lot of that had to do with the fact the offensive line wasn't missing a beat with all these injuries. They were still playing as a competent group, and it shows you the type of depth that they now have. I think it's the best depth they've had in the entire Pete Carroll era for their offensive line, and there's a lot of room to grow for these young players that are now getting these opportunities to play. On the defensive side of the football, I've talked about Bobby Wagner already on this show, so I don't want to exhaust the entire thing because we know how great of a player he is. We know he's a first ballot caliber talent with all the all-pros and all the tackles and the leadership that he brings. But I think that there was a consensus, and I would even say you and I, to an extent, we didn't play into this fully, but we thought that Bobby Wagner coming back, probably the biggest thing is going to be that he provides a stabilizing presence in the middle of the defense at this stage of his career, even with how he played last year. And he has not just been a stabilizing presence. I think we need to sit back and really soak in what we are watching here, because yesterday was as well as I have seen Bobby Wagner playing a game in a Seahawks uniform in 2 or 3 years, dating back to like 2020. This was as well as I've seen him play. The blitzing, he gets 2 sacks. Run defense, he's coming up and stonewalling dudes. The Giants average under 2.1 yards per carry from the running backs. And a big reason for that, number 54 getting downhill, plugging up holes, bashing guys in the line of scrimmage, behind the line of scrimmage. And even in coverage, they were able to get him a couple times with some quick patterns. But there were several plays where he dropped back into the intermediate 15, 20-yard range, and he covered tight ends. There was a couple times Darren Waller was covered, shaded up by him. And so I was really impressed by what I saw from Bobby Wagner, and he just continues to amaze me. I'll just say that. Just what he's doing out there on the field at his age, the way that he's playing, the fact that it feels like Seattle hasn't really over-adjusted their defense to accommodate putting him back in there. They haven't had to, because he's moving pretty darn well, and he's getting it done in every aspect of the game. And Daniel Jones certainly didn't like seeing number 54 coming at him when he tried to scramble a couple of times last night, and it led to sacks. So he isn't just a stabilizing force. Yes, he's clearly been that for the Seahawks defense, but he is still a star, an impact star in the middle, number 54, dominating for the Seahawks.
No, he absolutely is. I mean, he is basically the straw that stirs the drink. I mean, he is the guy in the middle that he, just like at the center position where you are basically calling out where the Mike linebacker is and basically setting the blocking scheme. You can just see Bobby Wagner out there directing traffic and making sure that everybody is lined up. And as you said, he is making plays at every level of the defense in terms of the run game where he's always excelled. Now the Seahawks are taking advantage of his ability to get downhill as a pass rusher. That was one of the things that was, frankly, well, not for the Seahawks, but for the Rams a year ago. Bobby Wagner was unleashed as a pass rusher, including against the Seahawks, and really kind of showed that he can do that as well. So that's definitely encouraging. I want to kind of switch to another defender here that's got a big name. Unfortunately, was, in a lot of people's opinions, a big disappointment on Monday night, and that being Jamal Adams. And, obviously, it is super disappointing to see him go down with yet another injury, concussion. Like anybody who saw the play, saw his helmet hit Daniel Jones's knee, and knew what the injury was right as it happened. At the same time, I would caution people just saying, Jamal Adams, he's overrated and all this kind of stuff. He was on the field, Corbin, for 9 plays. He made 2 tackles during that time. He had a quarterback hurry. Do you wish he made the sack? Of course. Do you wish he would have played, been healthy the entire game? Of course. But still, there is no doubt that he made an impact on this game. And I think that there's the one kind of nice thing about the fact that Seattle has its bye as early as it does, is they're very likely to have Jamal Adams back on the field when they return to action. And again, I think that we want to give a lot of credit to Bobby Wagner, to Devin Witherspoon, to Super Mario, as you called him. And I think justly, deserves that. But I also think that Jamal Adams brings that juice as well. To me, it was not a coincidence at the first game that he's on the field for the Seahawks, we see this type of spectacular performance from their whole defensive unit. So again, I think that big things are in store for the Seahawks, including Jamal Adams.
Yeah, I think that the 9 snaps he played, he was as impactful as any player that the Seahawks had on the field last night. I mean, he had that quarterback pressure, and I think if he was playing in his second or third game back, that is a sack. That was, to me, a clear rust. I haven't been playing in game situations, missed opportunity that he is not normally going to miss. And then he had those 2 tackles. It's tough when you're trying to tackle a quarterback like Daniel Jones. You don't want to hit him too high, so it's understandable why he went low, but unfortunately takes that knee to the helmet. And as you mentioned, it was clear once he made that tackle, it was obvious what the injury was and the way that he had to be helped off the field. He clearly wasn't all there. So the good thing is now he does get a full week here on the bye week to be in concussion protocol, get it himself feeling 100% and be ready to play against Cincinnati. So don't expect this to be something where he's going to be sitting out against the Bengals. He's going to be back on the field, and you should be encouraged by what you saw from him in his first game action of 2023. As always, you can follow me on Twitter, Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Subscribe and follow Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Coming up tomorrow, we will be dishing out our quarterly report card and looking at awards, who's the best offensive player, rookie of the year, things of that nature after 4 games heading into the bye week. We'll also have a special guest joining us that might have some thoughts weighing in on those awards as well. We hope to see you then. Thanks for listening and enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Go Hawks.